think when you were young, the problems that African American youth or even non-African American youth, the same problems they face today are similar to yours, or do you think it's just completely different?
I mean, it's both. They absolutely face the same problems and the same challenges, but it's just increased.
It's even more now.
Absolutely. I mean, every generation has more to battle with, right? So the idea of poverty remains the same, and the impact of poverty remains the same. Poverty limits your can limit life choices. It can harm the impact of your health over long periods of time. But so does racism. So does crime. And the difference between now and then is this right here, this cell phone, right? So with regards to that, the only difference is now I can show you. Now you can. The same stuff is going on. The same stuff that I experienced as a young man is what's going on now to these young people. But what's also different is that the drug game has changed.
How's that?
I mean, it was corny to get high.
It used to be corny to get high back in the day?
Yeah. I mean, smoke for young people, smoking weed and getting high were two different things. And alhamdulillah, you know, we got protected from a lot of that stuff, right? But they were two different things. Now, these young kids, they're not smoking the same thing. They don't have a problem taking pills. They don't have a problem getting high off of hard drugs. That's something that's totally different than what it was when we were young. When we were young, that wasn't something that we even thought of. So there's some things that are the same and there's some things that are different. But the challenge that remains is, how do we equal the playing field? So no matter what the issue is, what's the solution is where I'm focused.
And let's talk about that, actually, because there's a whole lot of controversy with this whole subject of whether African Americans have their boots on or not, and should be pulling themselves by the bootstraps. And a lot of people and almost all African Americans are saying we do not even have our boots on. And actually, one thing that I learned from my friend who is majoring in poverty and especially in Baltimore, I did not know this, and a lot of people don't know this, so that's why I want to talk to you about it, which is the fact that the United States government back in the 70s, was the infiltrator of crack cocaine into the streets of Baltimore and urban areas in general, and was the reason why the African American community was flooded with drugs. And one of the things that the White House, I think it was Nixon's White House representative, he said that we couldn't tell the world that we hated black people, and we couldn't tell the world that we hated liberals and hippies. So we gave black people and hippies drugs, and we told the world that we hate drugs.
So I'm going to take you further than that, because I think we got it.
I would love for you to do that.
We got to give it context, right?
Okay.
So if somebody ever tells me to pull up by my bootstraps, I'm going to take my boot and I'm going to show them what that strap can do, right? And I'm dead serious, because the idea that I even had boots is a fallacy. The idea that I had boots is a fallacy. Nobody wants to talk about what this country was built on. The purpose of the African American slave was to build up an economy. That was the purpose of slavery, and hatred just came along with it. But it came down to money. So when we look at, okay, slavery ended, but how long did it take to actually enact that, right? There were federal troops everywhere in this country trying to stop people from enslaving people. It's just like drugs becoming illegal. Are people still drug addicts? Absolutely. So the idea that slavery has ended all this long ago and it doesn't have an impact is ridiculous. But let's say it did. But then we had Jim Crowe. And for those who don't know what Jim Crowe is, because we talk about it all the time, let's make clear. Jim Crowe is a set of laws. It was actually started off as a cartoon to make fun of black people. But a set of laws to assure that black people remain subservient to Anglo-Saxon white people.
And I saw that they were afraid that it was leaders in the South that when they were watching African Americans rise up, African Americans financially improve, is when they decided to put in the Jim Crow laws. And you were talking to me last time we met, and this is so interesting. And I want you to talk to me a little bit more about it. It's like Intel Pro. Intel Pro. Did I say it correctly?
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
So before I get there, I want to go to something that's really important. This is important to me.
Go ahead.
50 years after slavery, Tulsa, Oklahoma, Black Wall Street was created.
So that's okay. I want you to just go through, just tell us the landmarks of basically history for this.
Okay, so there were black banks. There was a community. The community was in Tulsa. There was another community in Kansas. There were communities all over this country that were top tier, that were burnt, that were bombed. And who they were burnt and bombed by is what's interesting and what connects us to today. It was the individuals who were charged with being police. Wow. So when black people did well, right?
It was called the Black Wall Street.
It was called Black Wall Street. But I want to remind everybody this, that at every phase of this, there are black Muslims. Let's not forget that at every phase of this, so the idea that Muslims is something new to this country is a fallacy, right? Because there are slaves who came over and were able, in some cases, to keep their religion. So at every phase of this, there are black Muslims. So we should never separate the impact or the experience of the black American from the black Muslim. There is no separation. So let's say that happened. It was torn down. At every phase of this country, unfortunately, when African Americans began to rise, there were things that were put in their place to tear them down. And that's what you're talking about with regards to the drug epidemic. The drug epidemic was not something that just haphazardly happened to these people. It was something that was planned because we need in this country a working class. And it was decided long ago at the start of this country that working class will always be black people, will always be African Americans. And if that doesn't motivate someone, then I don't know what will. Because me and you, but every other American, especially any immigrant, benefits off of the backs of those persecuted, those oppressed black people and black Muslims. The idea of civil rights did not happen until what? 1964? How old is your oldest family member?
1950, I would say 1945.
Okay, so when they were born, if you say 1950, Jim Crowe laws were still in place. So black people couldn't vote. We're talking about couldn't vote. Literally, you're eating and drinking and doing things from the different, separate. But I think that what we have to think about with Jim Crow laws is, imagine you walking down the street and your child acting up and someone can just beat your child with a stick because they're acting unruly. That was the Jim Crow law. So when we think about why this pain exists, we can't separate the experiences of our grandparents. We can't separate the experience of our parents because they are still directly connected to that. I had a great-grandmother who I knew who was a slave.
Wow.
I had a great-grandmother in Mississippi who I was young enough and blessed enough to meet. So the idea that this thing is separate, that this thing is so old, is a fallacy, is phony. But I think that where we need to do a better job at And what keeps us motivated is that, for me, somebody had to create this change. And that change that we experience and we benefit from today came with lives lost. Nobody's asking anybody to lose their life anymore. So what are we willing to give every day? Are we willing to give a tweet, right? Are we willing to speak out when we hear something that's unjust? Are we willing to write someone? Are you willing to vote a certain way? Are you willing to hire someone? I mean, there's something that we can all do every day to help a group of people who benefited you more than you can ever know.
And actually, so that's what I want to talk to you about next. Is there's a lot that would have to happen for the African American community to be up on its feet and have the same opportunities and the same chances as the rest of the country. Honestly, I won't even say as much chances as white people, because I would say that even minorities in this country have been having it a lot easier than the African American community. So what do you think? And I'm not sure if you're familiar with this term, but Keystone. So what is the Keystone activity or Keystone action necessary for us to complete or work on in order for African Americans to improve on a much better scale, do you think, at least?
That's an excellent question, but I don't think it can't be one thing.
It can't be, right?
It absolutely, to put it in a box doesn't do it justice. I think that one of the things that we can do is that the idea of land ownership is real. Land ownership should be something that our country faces to say, hey, we owe this group of people land. We all, as Americans, as Muslims, when something is owed to that people, when they've been oppressed, we are always willing to fight for that group of people. When the Muslim ban happened, a lot of people came and they wouldn't stop to say this is incorrect. At what point as Americans, the Keystone, at what point as Americans do we say that what was done was wrong and there has to be a repayment for that? That repayment may not be cash or money or this type of thing, right? But I believe that it should be land ownership, because that doesn't go anywhere. And a lot of what we've experienced in our country over the years, we've experienced people who've owned large amounts of land to become wealthy.
And yeah, go ahead.
And the wealth isn't just it. What comes along with that is power to determine what policy looks like. And we have to make sure that we change our policy. And I believe we do that in the long run, assuring that individuals, African Americans, black people, do what was due to them 400 years ago, 300 years ago. It was given to them and then it was taken again after slavery. So I think that we have to start there. The other thing is that, listen, let's be clear. Education is extremely important. Healthcare is extremely important. I'm a mental health provider. I'm a therapist. Mental health is extremely important. But until those providers come in an equitable way, so there's this statement that black people don't go see therapists. It's something we don't do. Yes, we do. Due to Jim Crowe, we were taught not to tell everyone our business because of what they could do to us. So me, myself, is growing up, right? Growing up, young black Muslim. going to public school. Don't tell that social worker our business. You know that white lady will get you out the house. So when that happens, that's ingrained in us, but that's ingrained in us due to Jim Crowe. What breaks that is that when that white lady, and there's nothing wrong with that white lady being there, but I haven't been built up enough. If that white lady was a black lady who happened to come from the same community, who actually knew my mother, then we're totally different story. If you're having a hard time, make sure you go talk to Miss such and such. That's where we have to get to. We have to create opportunities for African Americans to excel. No longer can we say that, oh, we're going to make things even. They've been even for quite a long time. You heard the term equal, right? Mm-hmm. Equal opportunity. We can create equal opportunities in the same way in Jim Crow South we created equal opportunities for bathrooms, right? You go piss in the porta potty in the back, and I'm gonna use this front door. We have to create real equal opportunity for African Americans by assuring that we put them first in some situations because it's due to them, not because things aren't fair now, but because what we have today was built on the backs of those individuals.
And if anyone out there thinks what you're saying is radical at all, it's not. Actually, the United States government throughout the years has given reparations to minorities, especially Native Americans, through land, through giving them land. Hey, so sorry about how we treated you. Here's some land. And they've done that with everyone except the African American community. So what you're saying is not radical at all. It's nothing new to the United States, and it's just they've decided not to do it with the African American community.